In the book, you talk really eloquently about where you grew up. Mm-hmm. And listening to an interview with you recently, you talk even more eloquently about depression and about a battle with depression. And just from comments on my social media and people interacting with me when I said I was going to interview you, they were kind of blown away by your comments on depression and your comments on dealing with depression. I have some questions I'm going to put to you from listeners at the end, but I think a lot of people were surprised by that. A lot of people were surprised. I know you've spoken about it before, but I hadn't heard personally you speak about it in that kind of way than you did on the Joe Rogan podcast. And you were kind of getting emotional as well. Is that something that just came out in the moment in the midst of the conversation?
Well, my family, going back several generations, has been cursed with a particularly vicious form of depression. And so it's been quite a catastrophe. It really affected my grandfather for decades. He was immobilized, I would say, after the death of his father. It was really awful. And it hit my father when he was in his late 40s. There were signs of it before that, especially in the winter. And my dad's a very competent person, and so the fact that took him down to a large degree was a shock to everyone that knew him, including him. And then it affected me, and it affected my daughter and a number of cousins, and it's really pervasive. And so it's a nasty condition. You described it as imagining that your whole family had just been killed the day before, and that feeling, kind of on a consistent basis. Well, I can tell you an example of it. Well, my daughter has a serious autoimmune condition, and it's very painful. She has had 40 affected arthritic joints, which is plenty. 1 is plenty. 3 is a lot. 40 is way more than necessary. And she, her ankle and her hip deteriorated to the point where they were both replaced when she was 16 and 17. So she basically walked around for 2 years on 2 broken legs and was on very high doses of painkillers. And anyways, it was quite the catastrophe. And she also has this predisposition to depression. And so we've talked a lot about both of those things. And I asked her one day if she'd rather have the arthritis or the depression. And she said she'd rather have the arthritis. So that's not a bad index. And then I talked to her too about trying to describe what it was like to feel that way. And she said, well, it's like your dog just died all the time. And she really liked her dog. It was a real source of comfort to her when she was growing up. And then about 2 years later, 2 years ago, our dog died. And I asked her, well, is it like that? And she said, no, it's a lot worse than that. And so it's not good. So what causes it exactly, I'm not clear about. It looks like it's part of the autoimmune condition that she has. There's autoimmune disorders on my family on both sides and also on my wife's family. So I think my daughter got it from both sides. So, but she's much, much better. She's healthy now, amazingly enough.
Because I've actually gotten some questions about it, about your diet and how you've changed your diet to just specifically eat meat, and how that has benefited you and benefited your daughter.
To have certainly benefited
so far,
her.
At least. But it was your daughter that suggested this to you.
Well, yes, she did. She figured it out, I would say, and then suggested that I try it. And I thought, well, it had such amazing impact on her. It's absolutely unbelievable. I still don't believe it that it worked. I still can't believe it. But she's symptom-free. Her depression is gone. Her fatigue is gone. All her joint symptoms are gone. She looks great. She's doing fine. It's amazing. As
a clinical psychologist and somebody who's trained in it and practicing it for many years, is that something you can comprehend?
No, not really. I mean, look, there is evidence that depression is a lot of different things. It's one term that covers all sorts of different disorders with all sorts of pathways. And there is evidence that one of the functions of antidepressants is anti-inflammatory, and that depression is an inflammatory condition, and that it's associated with autoimmune dysfunction. And so who knows how prevalent that is. I mean, it's more prevalent than people thought 20 years ago. This science, independent of my opinion and my daughter's opinion, independent of that, there's evidence for autoimmune involvement in the pathophysiology of depression. The degree to which that's a contributor to what degree that contributes to depression in the general population is unknown.
But is there a feeling then that some of your followers, I don't want to say followers like you're the Messiah, I know you don't like that either, but some of your fans, I suppose, or people who've bought your book and will go and see your shows and download your podcasts, you know, there's an element of depression with some of these guys, because obviously, and girls, because obviously you've said, it's individualism. That's kind of what you're pushed to be responsible for your own actions, and this is what has reverberated with your fan base.
Yep. You mean you're speaking about the potential contradiction between those things?
Yeah.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, look, it's clearly the case that I think your best bet in life is to shoulder your suffering and to take responsibility and to move forward. But that doesn't mean that you're not vulnerable on all sorts of fronts. It's just your best tactic. Just because it's your best tactic doesn't mean it will always work. But you don't have a better tactic. So, one of the things we constantly told my daughter was not to ever use her illness as an excuse. Mostly because it would blur the lines between her and the illness. You don't ever want to do that. So we wanted her to be as responsible as she could be, given what she had to endure. It was a very difficult thing to figure out. If you have a kid that's sick like that, it's like, well, they don't want to get up to go to school. Well, you probably wouldn't want to get up either if you were like in pain, lots of pain. What do? You say you stay in bed, or do you say get the hell up if you can and get out, because the alternative is worse? And so, we always pushed her and encouraged her to bear as much as she could. And I would say that was the right strategy, because she did manage to have as much of a life as she could have under the circumstances, and she's come through all this with her character intact. So, which I think is really quite beyond belief to me, but it still seems to be the case. So it isn't that shouldering your suffering and bearing the responsibility for your life is a panacea, because we're vulnerable to all sorts of things that happen to us that are, in some sense, ultimately uncontrollable. I mean, that's why people die, right? But it doesn't matter in the face of that. There still isn't a better strategy.